I was 3 steps from my gallery's entrance when I heard the glass shatter. The sound echoed through the corridor like a gunshot, stopping me cold. Through the frosted windows of Jensen Contemporary, I could see shadows moving inside, too many shadows for a space that should have been empty at 9 in the evening. My gallery. My sanctuary. The place I'd poured 7 years of sweat and savings into building. Something was very wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I pushed through the door to find Dennis Crawford, my stepfather, holding a crowbar like a baseball bat. Around him, 3 men I'd never seen before were systematically destroying the installation I'd spent 6 months curating. Canvas after canvas, ripped from the walls. Sculptures toppled. The centerpiece, a glass installation by emerging artist Yuki Tanaka worth $80,000, lay in glittering fragments across the polished concrete floor. My opening was scheduled for tomorrow night. Critics were flying in from New York and Los Angeles. This was supposed to be the exhibition that put my gallery on the national map. What happened next changed everything. By the time the dust settled, they'd lost more than just their freedom. They'd lost their reputations, their assets, and any illusion that family ties could protect them from consequences. My name is Maya Jensen, and this is how I learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones most determined to watch you fail. At 34, I'd built something most people in Portland's art scene considered remarkable. Jensen Contemporary wasn't just another gallery in the Pearl District. It was a launchpad for artists who challenged conventions, who created work that made people uncomfortable in the best possible ways. I'd started small 7 years ago, working 3 jobs while transforming a former textile warehouse into a space that balanced raw industrial edges with sophisticated lighting systems that could make any piece sing. The art world is brutal to newcomers, especially women who don't come from money or connections. I had neither. What I had was an eye for talent before anyone else saw it, a willingness to take risks on artists the established galleries ignored, and a work ethic that terrified my competitors. My first exhibition featured a Guatemalan immigrant whose paintings explored displacement and identity. The established critics dismissed it. The public lined up around the block. 3 pieces sold in the opening hour, and suddenly, people were paying attention. Over 7 years, I'd built a roster of 12 artists, launched 5 careers that were now thriving in major markets, and created a space that drew collectors from across the country. My cut from sales had finally allowed me to buy the warehouse building itself, securing my future in a city where real estate prices climbed faster than anyone could predict. The loft above the gallery became my home, an open space where I could wake up surrounded by art, where the line between my work and my life dissolved entirely. My relationship with my mother had always been complicated, but it was my connection to Dennis Crawford that taught me what true toxicity looked like. Mom married him when I was 11, 3 years after my father died from cancer. She was drowning in medical debt and grief, vulnerable to anyone who promised stability. Dennis was a real estate developer who specialized in flipping properties in gentrifying neighborhoods, the kind of man who saw dollar signs where other people saw communities. He was charismatic at parties, generous with compliments in public, and calculating in ways that took me years to fully understand. He brought Tyler into our lives, his son from a first marriage. Tyler was 13 when they got married, already showing signs of the entitled mediocrity that would define his adult life. Where I worked after-school jobs and earned scholarships, Tyler coasted on his father's connections and money. Where I saved every dollar for college, Tyler had a trust fund he burned through on failed business ventures and expensive hobbies. Dennis saw Tyler's laziness as entrepreneurial spirit, his failures as learning experiences that deserved endless second chances. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone. At family dinners, Dennis would interrogate me about my grades, my college applications, my career choices, always finding something to criticize. Tyler's latest scheme to start a cryptocurrency consulting firm despite understanding nothing about technology would be praised as innovative thinking. When I got into Portland State on a full scholarship, Dennis suggested I should have aimed higher, that settling for a state school showed limited ambition. When Tyler flunked out of community college, Dennis blamed the professors for not recognizing his son's genius. My mother watched these dynamics with growing discomfort but never intervened. She'd traded her voice for financial security, convincing herself that keeping peace was the same as keeping family together. I learned early that I was on my own, that success would come from my own efforts, and that the best way to deal with Dennis was to build a life so separate from his influence that his opinions became irrelevant. After college, I worked as an assistant at established galleries, learning the business from every angle. Installation techniques, client relations, pricing strategies, contract negotiations, insurance requirements, shipping logistics. I absorbed everything while living in a studio apartment barely large enough for a bed and a desk, eating ramen and day-old bagels, saving 70% of every paycheck. My co-workers thought I was obsessed. They were right. Obsession was the only way forward when you had no safety net and no family support to fall back on. The warehouse came available during a market dip. The owner was retiring, willing to sell to someone who'd preserve the building's character rather than gut it for condos. I'd saved $40,000, enough for a down payment if I could secure financing. Every bank rejected me. Too young, too risky, too much debt from student loans I was still paying down. I was ready to give up when a collector I'd worked with, an older woman who'd made her fortune in tech, offered to co-sign. She believed in my vision when no one else would. Jensen Contemporary opened on a rainy October evening with an exhibition of photographs documenting Portland's disappearing working-class neighborhoods. The work was political, uncomfortable, necessary. Established galleries had passed on it. I built the show around it. Local media covered the opening. 3 city council members attended. I sold enough pieces to cover my first 3 months of mortgage payments, and suddenly I had something I'd never experienced before, momentum. The next 7 years became a blur of exhibitions, late nights, relationship attempts that failed because I couldn't turn off my brain long enough to prioritize someone else's needs, and a growing reputation that brought artists to my door instead of me chasing them. I deliberately kept my family at a distance, seeing Dennis and Mom maybe 3 times a year at obligatory gatherings where I'd arrive late and leave early, deflecting questions about my personal life with vague pleasantries. I was 3 steps from my gallery's entrance when I heard the glass shatter. The sound echoed through the corridor like a gunshot, stopping me cold. Through the frosted windows of Jensen Contemporary, I could see shadows moving inside, too many shadows for a space that should have been empty at 9 in the evening. My gallery. My sanctuary. The place I'd poured 7 years of sweat and savings into building. Something was very wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I pushed through the door to find Dennis Crawford, my stepfather, holding a crowbar like a baseball bat. Around him, 3 men I'd never seen before were systematically destroying the installation I'd spent 6 months curating. Canvas after canvas, ripped from the walls. Sculptures toppled. The centerpiece, a glass installation by emerging artist Yuki Tanaka worth $80,000, lay in glittering fragments across the polished concrete floor. My opening was scheduled for tomorrow night. Critics were flying in from New York and Los Angeles. This was supposed to be the exhibition that put my gallery on the national map. What happened next changed everything. By the time the dust settled, they'd lost more than just their freedom. They'd lost their reputations, their assets, and any illusion that family ties could protect them from consequences. My name is Maya Jensen, and this is how I learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones most determined to watch you fail. At 34, I'd built something most people in Portland's art scene considered remarkable. Jensen Contemporary wasn't just another gallery in the Pearl District. It was a launchpad for artists who challenged conventions, who created work that made people uncomfortable in the best possible ways. I'd started small 7 years ago, working 3 jobs while transforming a former textile warehouse into a space that balanced raw industrial edges with sophisticated lighting systems that could make any piece sing. The art world is brutal to newcomers, especially women who don't come from money or connections. I had neither. What I had was an eye for talent before anyone else saw it, a willingness to take risks on artists the established galleries ignored, and a work ethic that terrified my competitors. My first exhibition featured a Guatemalan immigrant whose paintings explored displacement and identity. The established critics dismissed it. The public lined up around the block. 3 pieces sold in the opening hour, and suddenly, people were paying attention. Over 7 years, I'd built a roster of 12 artists, launched 5 careers that were now thriving in major markets, and created a space that drew collectors from across the country. My cut from sales had finally allowed me to buy the warehouse building itself, securing my future in a city where real estate prices climbed faster than anyone could predict. The loft above the gallery became my home, an open space where I could wake up surrounded by art, where the line between my work and my life dissolved entirely. My relationship with my mother had always been complicated, but it was my connection to Dennis Crawford that taught me what true toxicity looked like. Mom married him when I was 11, 3 years after my father died from cancer. She was drowning in medical debt and grief, vulnerable to anyone who promised stability. Dennis was a real estate developer who specialized in flipping properties in gentrifying neighborhoods, the kind of man who saw dollar signs where other people saw communities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He was charismatic at parties, generous with compliments in public, and calculating in ways that took me years to fully understand. He brought Tyler into our lives, his son from a first marriage. Tyler was 13 when they got married, already showing signs of the entitled mediocrity that would define his adult life. Where I worked after-school jobs and earned scholarships, Tyler coasted on his father's connections and money. Where I saved every dollar for college, Tyler had a trust fund he burned through on failed business ventures and expensive hobbies. Dennis saw Tyler's laziness as entrepreneurial spirit, his failures as learning experiences that deserved endless second chances. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone. At family dinners, Dennis would interrogate me about my grades, my college applications, my career choices, always finding something to criticize. Tyler's latest scheme to start a cryptocurrency consulting firm despite understanding nothing about technology would be praised as innovative thinking. When I got into Portland State on a full scholarship, Dennis suggested I should have aimed higher, that settling for a state school showed limited ambition. When Tyler flunked out of community college, Dennis blamed the professors for not recognizing his son's genius. My mother watched these dynamics with growing discomfort but never intervened. She'd traded her voice for financial security, convincing herself that keeping peace was the same as keeping family together. I learned early that I was on my own, that success would come from my own efforts, and that the best way to deal with Dennis was to build a life so separate from his influence that his opinions became irrelevant. After college, I worked as an assistant at established galleries, learning the business from every angle. Installation techniques, client relations, pricing strategies, contract negotiations, insurance requirements, shipping logistics. I absorbed everything while living in a studio apartment barely large enough for a bed and a desk, eating ramen and day-old bagels, saving 70% of every paycheck. My co-workers thought I was obsessed. They were right. Obsession was the only way forward when you had no safety net and no family support to fall back on. The warehouse came available during a market dip. The owner was retiring, willing to sell to someone who'd preserve the building's character rather than gut it for condos. I'd saved $40,000, enough for a down payment if I could secure financing. Every bank rejected me. Too young, too risky, too much debt from student loans I was still paying down. I was ready to give up when a collector I'd worked with, an older woman who'd made her fortune in tech, offered to co-sign. She believed in my vision when no one else would. Jensen Contemporary opened on a rainy October evening with an exhibition of photographs documenting Portland's disappearing working-class neighborhoods. The work was political, uncomfortable, necessary. Established galleries had passed on it. I built the show around it. Local media covered the opening. 3 city council members attended. I sold enough pieces to cover my first 3 months of mortgage payments, and suddenly I had something I'd never experienced before, momentum. The next 7 years became a blur of exhibitions, late nights, relationship attempts that failed because I couldn't turn off my brain long enough to prioritize someone else's needs, and a growing reputation that brought artists to my door instead of me chasing them. I deliberately kept my family at a distance, seeing Dennis and Mom maybe 3 times a year at obligatory gatherings where I'd arrive late and leave early, deflecting questions about my personal life with vague pleasantries. Through watering eyes, I saw Tyler setting my laptop and documents on the one clear section of floor, carefully, as if he hadn't just watched his father assault me. The 3 other men had gone back to their work, pulling down more pieces, clearly accustomed to ignoring things that didn't concern them. "You've always been difficult," Dennis continued, advancing on me as I pushed myself upright. "Always thought you were smarter than everyone else. Your mother worried about you constantly, lying awake wondering when you'd crash and burn with this foolish gallery dream. We tried to be patient, tried to let you learn the hard way, but enough is enough." My back was against the wall, literally. He stood too close, using his height and bulk to intimidate, a technique I'd seen him employ countless times over the years with Mom, with contractors who questioned his methods, with anyone who dared challenge his authority. But I wasn't 11 anymore, wasn't the powerless stepdaughter who had to endure his presence for the sake of family peace. "You need to leave," I said, forcing my voice to stay level. "All of you. This is breaking and entering. This is destruction of property. These are crimes, Dennis, and family doesn't protect you from that." He laughed, genuinely amused. "Crimes? I'm trying to save you from yourself. Look at this place. You've dumped your life into weird garbage that nobody wants. Tyler's been telling me about a client who's interested in this space, someone who'd actually use it for something productive. We're helping you get out before you lose everything. By destroying my exhibition the night before it opens? By stealing my business records?" I pushed off the wall, anger overriding caution. "This isn't help. This is sabotage." His hand shot out again, this time catching me across the face. The slap echoed through the gallery, sharp and shocking. My cheek exploded with heat, and I tasted copper where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. Tyler actually gasped behind us, but Dennis didn't turn, didn't acknowledge what he'd just done. "You don't talk to me like that," he said quietly. "I've tolerated your disrespect for years, your superior attitude, your refusal to acknowledge what this family has done for you. No more. You're going to sign over the client list to Tyler. You're going to cancel tomorrow's opening. And you're going to accept that this fantasy is over." My ears were ringing, but through the shock, one thought emerged with crystal clarity. He'd hit me. In my own gallery, in front of witnesses, he'd actually hit me. And Tyler hadn't stopped him. The 3 contractors hadn't stopped him. They were all complicit, all comfortable with this violence, all certain that family authority trumped law. I bent down slowly, never taking my eyes off Dennis, and retrieved my phone. My hands were shaking, but I managed to swipe it open. The screen was cracked but functional. I held it up, finger hovering over the emergency call button. "Get out now, or I call 911. Your choice." Dennis's face darkened. "You're bluffing. You won't involve the police in family business. Your mother would never forgive you. Try me." For a long moment, we stood there, locked in a test of wills I'd never attempted before. Every other confrontation had ended with me backing down, leaving early, choosing distance over direct conflict. But he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He'd brought violence into the space I'd built as sanctuary. He'd destroyed work that wasn't mine to sacrifice, art that represented other people's dreams and livelihoods. He'd hit me, and he expected me to accept it as correction. Dennis must have seen something different in my face, some shift that made him uncertain, because he stepped back. "Fine. We'll leave. But when you come crawling back after tomorrow's disaster, when the critics laugh at your little hobby and you realize nobody's coming to save you, don't expect us to help." He gestured to Tyler and the contractors. "Pack up what we came for. We're done here." "You're not taking anything," I said, moving between them and my documents. "Nothing leaves this gallery except you." Tyler looked to his father, uncertain. Dennis's jaw clenched, but after a moment, he nodded. "Leave it. She'll learn soon enough." They filed out, the contractors first, then Tyler carrying nothing but his entitled resentment, finally Dennis pausing at the door for one last parting shot. Your mother's going to be heartbroken when she hears how you treated family. I hope your precious art was worth destroying your last real relationships. The door closed behind them. The gallery fell silent except for the faint traffic sounds from the street and my own ragged breathing. I stood among the wreckage, phone still clutched in my shaking hand, and felt something shift inside me. Not breaking. Hardening. They thought I'd crumble. They thought destroying the opening would destroy me, that I'd slink away from my failure and accept their narrative about foolish dreams and inevitable defeat. They'd miscalculated badly. What they'd actually done was give me clarity about exactly how far they were willing to go and exactly how little family meant when weighed against their need for control. I walked carefully through the debris to my office, which they'd ransacked but not demolished. My backup drive was still in its hiding place, tucked inside a hollowed-out art book on the shelf. Every contract, every client relationship, every piece of documentation I needed was duplicated there. They'd stolen nothing that mattered except time and peace of mind. My reflection in the office window showed the damage. My cheek was already swelling, the mark of Dennis's hand visible even in the dim light. My shoulder throbbed where I'd hit the wall. But my eyes were clear, focused, no longer clouded by any obligation to protect people who'd proven they didn't deserve protection. I took photos. Everything. Every damaged piece, every angle of destruction, the scattered glass, the torn canvases, the empty walls. I photographed my face, documenting the swelling, the cut inside my mouth. I filmed a video walking through the entire space, narrating what had happened, naming names, establishing timeline. Then I backed everything up to the cloud, sent copies to 3 different email addresses, and finally, hands steady now, I called the police. The 911 operator was professional, concerned about the assault first, the property damage second. Officers were dispatched immediately. I was assured someone would arrive within minutes. I thanked her and hung up, then made the second call, this one to my insurance agent. Evan Parker had handled my policies since the gallery opened, and his emergency line was answered on the second ring. Maya? What's wrong? I need to file a claim. Major damage. Also potential fraud attempt. I need you to flag my policies immediately against any unauthorized changes. His tone shifted to pure business. Tell me everything. By the time the police arrived, I had 3 separate processes in motion. Insurance claim filed with full documentation. Locks being changed by an emergency locksmith who'd arrive within the hour. Security company contacted about upgrading my entire system. The victim mentality Dennis expected hadn't materialized. Instead, I'd shifted into the same mode that had built this gallery from nothing, the relentless problem-solving focus that treated obstacles as puzzles requiring solutions. The responding officers were thorough. They documented everything, took my statement, photographed my injuries, collected evidence of the break-in. When I named Dennis Crawford as the perpetrator, the older officer's eyebrows rose. The real estate developer? Dennis Crawford who sits on the planning commission? The same one, I confirmed. Does that matter? He exchanged a glance with his partner. Just means this is going to get complicated. Men like that have lawyers on speed dial and friends in places that matter. You sure you want to press charges? Family disputes can get messy. I touched my swollen cheek. He assaulted me in my place of business after breaking in and destroying over $200,000 in art. This isn't a family dispute. These are crimes. The younger officer nodded approvingly. We'll need you to come to the station tomorrow for a formal statement. In the meantime, we'll file the report tonight. Do you feel safe staying here? I'm changing all the locks. Security upgrade starts tomorrow. And I have no intention of letting them chase me out of my own space. After they left, I sat in my office chair and let myself feel it. Not the fear they'd tried to instill, but the rage of violation, the grief of destroyed work that wasn't mine to lose. Yuki's centerpiece couldn't be repaired or replaced. 6 months of her life, her vision, her expression of inherited trauma around displacement, gone because Dennis needed to prove his dominance. The other damaged pieces represented 15 artists' work, countless hours of creation, expressions that existed nowhere else in the world. They'd wanted to break me. Instead, they'd given me perfect clarity about exactly what needed to happen next. I didn't sleep. Instead, I spent the night in what remained of my office, laptop open, making lists. Criminal attorney specializing in assault cases. Civil litigation lawyer for the property damage. Public relations consultant who understood crisis management. Security specialists. Art restoration experts who could assess what might be salvaged. Insurance adjusters. Every contact I'd cultivated over 7 years in the art world, every professional relationship I'd built, every favor I could call in. By 4 a.m, I had a strategy mapped across 3 legal notepads. Criminal charges for assault and breaking and entering. Civil suit for destruction of property and attempted theft of business assets. Restraining orders to keep them away from the gallery and my person. Documentation of everything, backed up in multiple locations, shared with my attorney the moment offices opened. The locksmith had finished at midnight, installing commercial-grade deadbolts and a security bar for the main entrance. The security company would arrive at 8 to upgrade cameras and install motion sensors throughout the space. I'd called Yuki in Seattle at 2 a.m, waking her to explain what had happened to her work. Her silence on the other end of the line lasted so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Maya," she finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "That piece took me 4 months to create. It was about my grandmother's internment, about displacement and loss. I poured everything into it. I know. I'm so sorry. I have full documentation. Photos of the installation, the destruction, everything. My insurance will cover the monetary value, but I understand that doesn't replace what was lost." Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, she asked, "Are you okay? He hit you?" The concern in her voice, the way she prioritized my well-being over her destroyed work, made my throat tighten. "I'm angry. But I'm going to make sure they face consequences for this." "Good." Her voice hardened. "I want to press charges too. That wasn't just your property they destroyed. It was mine. I want them to understand they didn't just hurt you." By the time dawn broke over Portland, I had commitments from 8 of my 12 artists to provide statements about the value of the destroyed work, the impact of the sabotaged opening, and their support for legal action. The art community was smaller and more connected than outsiders realized. Word of the destruction had already spread through late-night texts and social media posts. 3 established galleries had reached out offering assistance. 2 collectors who'd planned to attend the opening contacted me directly, asking how they could help. At 7, I called Mom. She answered on the 5th ring, her voice groggy with sleep or perhaps something stronger. "Maya? It's so early. What's wrong?" "Dennis broke into my gallery last night. He brought Tyler and 3 other men. They destroyed over $200,000 worth of art. When I tried to stop them, Dennis hit me. I've filed police reports for assault and breaking and entering. I'm calling to let you know you might hear from investigators." Silence. Then, in a smaller voice, he said he was going to talk to you. Try to help you see reason about the opening. He didn't say anything about destroying things. "Mom," he called it an intervention. He had Tyler stealing my business documents. This wasn't about helping me. This was calculated sabotage. I heard her breathing, uneven and strained. "There must be a misunderstanding. Dennis wouldn't actually hurt you. Your family. I have medical photos of where he hit me. I have security footage of them breaking in. I have witnesses. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is assault and destruction of property, and I'm pursuing every legal option available." Her voice shifted, taking on the pleading tone I'd heard countless times growing up. "Don't do this. Don't involve the police in family problems. We can work this out privately. Dennis didn't mean to hurt you. He's under a lot of stress with Tyler's situation." Tyler's situation. As if his perpetual failure was a crisis that justified attacking me. I felt the old familiar pressure to accommodate, to minimize my own harm for the sake of family peace, and pushed back against it with everything I had. No. We're not working this out privately. He committed crimes. Multiple crimes. And I'm not protecting him from consequences because you'd prefer I stay quiet. Maya, please. Think about what this will do to our family. To me. How can I stay married to someone my daughter sent to jail? The question revealed everything. Not how could Dennis hit you, not what was he thinking, not are you okay? Just concern about her own comfort, her own choices, the consequences she might face for choosing him over everyone else. I can't help you with that, Mom. Those are decisions you have to make for yourself. But I won't sacrifice my safety or my business to make your marriage easier. I ended the call before she could respond, hands trembling not from fear but from the finality of it. Whatever relationship remained between us had just fractured beyond simple repair. She'd been given a choice between supporting her daughter who'd been assaulted or protecting her husband who'd committed the assault, and she'd chosen to pressure the victim. I'd remember that. At 8 sharp, Marcus Chin arrived at the gallery. I'd found him through a referral from another gallery owner who'd dealt with a theft situation. He was a criminal defense attorney who'd switched to prosecution work after his sister was assaulted by her partner. He took cases like mine personally, and his reputation for aggressive pursuit of domestic violence perpetrators was exactly what I needed. He walked through the gallery slowly, taking in every detail of destruction, his expression growing darker with each step. When he reached the space where migration had hung, now just empty air and scattered glass, he stopped and turned to me. Tell me everything. Don't leave out any detail, even if you think it's not important. I talked for an hour. He took notes, asked clarifying questions, had me repeat certain sections while he recorded on his phone. When I described Dennis hitting me, he had me turn my head to photograph the bruise in different lighting. When I mentioned Tyler attempting to steal documents, he wanted to know exactly which ones and what they contained. He was thorough, methodical, and utterly focused. This is solid, he said when I finished. Assault with witnesses, breaking and entering, destruction of property with clear monetary value, attempted theft of business assets. The fact that he called it an intervention doesn't matter legally. Intent to help isn't a defense against these crimes. What about his connections? The police mentioned he sits on the planning commission. Marcus smiled grimly. Which makes it worse for him, not better. Public officials are held to higher standards. The DA's office won't want to appear to be giving him special treatment. And honestly, men like Dennis Crawford have usually made enemies. Once charges are filed, people who've been intimidated by him tend to come forward. How long until we can move forward? He checked his watch. I'll file for an emergency restraining order this afternoon. Criminal complaints go to the DA today with all your documentation. Civil suit will prepare over the next week, but we can file preliminary motions to freeze his assets so he can't hide money before judgment. You said he's a real estate developer? Multiple properties across Portland. Some commercial, some residential flips. We'll put liens on everything we can identify. Make it clear that fighting this will cost him more than settling. But Maya, I need you to prepare for them to fight dirty. Men like this don't accept accountability easily. Expect character assassination, attempts to paint you as unstable or vindictive, pressure through family members. I thought about Mom's phone call, the immediate instinct to blame me for involving authorities. They're already doing that. I'm ready. The security team arrived while Marcus and I were finalizing paperwork. They spent 3 hours installing cameras with cloud backup, motion sensors on all entry points, reinforced locks on the storage areas, and a panic button system connected directly to a monitoring service. The lead installer, a former military security specialist named Ana Reyes, walked me through every feature. You've got eyes on every angle now, she explained. Tamper-proof, remote access so you can check from anywhere, automatic alerts if anyone tries to breach. Nobody's getting in here again without you knowing immediately. By noon, the gallery looked like a crime scene and a fortress simultaneously. Yellow evidence markers from the police investigation dotted the floor. New locks gleamed on every door. Cameras monitored every corner. And I stood in the center of it all, exhausted but energized by forward motion. Yuki called again around 1. "I've been thinking about what you said. About them trying to sabotage your opening. Is that really what this was about?" I pulled up Tyler's social media on my laptop while we talked. His most recent posts painted the picture clearly. References to a new business venture in the arts district. Photos taken outside my gallery with captions about exciting opportunities. Mentions of prime real estate becoming available soon. He'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Tyler wants this space," I told Yuki. He probably convinced Dennis it was a smart investment opportunity, a way to finally have a successful business using what I'd built. The opening was their deadline. They needed me to fail publicly so I'd be willing to sell cheap. Her voice hardened with understanding. "They weren't just destroying art. They were trying to destroy your credibility, your reputation with collectors and critics. If the opening was a disaster, if people showed up to find chaos instead of an exhibition." Exactly. I'd look incompetent. Unreliable. Artists would hesitate to work with me. Collectors would take their business elsewhere. The gallery's value would plummet right when Tyler needed me desperate enough to accept whatever lowball offer they made. That's calculated, Maya. That's not family drama. That's conspiracy to commit fraud. She was right. What I'd initially processed as Dennis's need for dominance was actually something more methodical. He'd weaponized his access to my family connection to enable Tyler's business ambitions, and he'd been willing to destroy my livelihood to do it. The violence was just enforcement when I didn't comply with the script. Marcus called at 2. Motion filed for emergency restraining order. Hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9. Can you be there? I'll be there. Good. I've also been making calls. Turns out Dennis Crawford has quite a history. 3 complaints filed with the city about intimidation tactics on development projects. 2 lawsuits from former business partners alleging fraud, both settled with non-disclosure agreements. And here's the interesting part. A woman who worked as his assistant 5 years ago filed a harassment complaint that went nowhere because she couldn't afford to fight his lawyers. Can we contact her? Already did. She's willing to testify about his pattern of intimidation and violence if this goes to trial. She's been waiting years for someone to actually hold him accountable. More pieces falling into place. Dennis hadn't just targeted me. I was simply the latest in a long line of people he'd bullied, threatened, and intimidated to get what he wanted. The difference was that I had resources he hadn't anticipated, a professional network he'd underestimated, and zero remaining loyalty to protect him from consequences. As the afternoon wore on, more support materialized. The gallery owner who'd referred me to Marcus stopped by with coffee and offers to help contact media if I wanted to go public. 2 of my artists drove down from Seattle to help catalog the damage and assess what might be salvageable. A collector who'd bought 3 pieces over the years sent a message offering to fund legal costs if I needed assistance. The art community was rallying, not just because they liked me, but because the attack represented something they all feared. The destruction of creative work, the silencing of artistic voices, the violence against someone who'd built something meaningful. This wasn't just about my gallery anymore. It was about whether we'd tolerate people using force to take what they wanted from those they considered weaker. By evening, I had a legal team assembled, security in place, and a growing file of evidence and witness statements. The opening was officially postponed, but rather than seeing it as defeat, I was reconceptualizing it as something different. Not just an exhibition, but a statement about resilience, about refusing to be silenced, about the community that forms when violence tries to scatter us. I stood in the gallery as sunset light filtered through the windows, illuminating the empty spaces where art had hung. Tomorrow I'd face Dennis in court. Tomorrow the real battle would begin. But tonight, in the wreckage of what they'd destroyed, I felt something I hadn't expected. Power. The power that comes from refusing to be diminished by people who expect submission. They'd tried to break me and handed me weapons instead. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, utilitarian and fluorescent lit, smelling faintly of floor polish and anxiety. I arrived 30 minutes early with Marcus, who'd coached me during the drive about keeping responses brief, making eye contact with the judge, and showing emotion appropriately but not excessively. Dennis sat across the aisle with his attorney, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who radiated the kind of confidence that came from decades of making problems disappear for wealthy clients. Dennis looked smaller than he had in my gallery, diminished somehow by the formal setting, but his eyes when they met mine held pure contempt. Next to him sat Tyler, dressed uncharacteristically professional, clearly instructed to play the role of concerned family member. Mom wasn't there. That absence told me everything about the choice she'd made. Judge Patricia Herrera entered briskly, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She reviewed the emergency restraining order petition while we stood, her expression unreadable. When she finally looked up, her gaze went first to my face, where the bruise had deepened to purple and yellow, then to Dennis. Mr. Crawford, you're accused of assault, breaking and entering, and destruction of property at the petitioner's place of business. How do you respond to these allegations? His attorney stood smoothly. Your Honor, this is a family misunderstanding that's been blown entirely out of proportion. Mr. Crawford is the petitioner's stepfather. He's been concerned about her well-being for some time. When he learned she was planning an event that he believed would be professionally damaging, he attempted to intervene. Things became heated, as family discussions sometimes do, but there was no criminal intent. Judge Herrera's expression didn't change. Breaking into someone's business after hours and destroying property worth over $200,000 seems to exceed a heated family discussion. And the assault? A regrettable moment of frustration. Mr. Crawford deeply regrets any physical contact. However, we believe Ms. Jensen is exaggerating the incident to gain advantage in what is essentially a business dispute. Marcus stood, and I felt the temperature in the room shift. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence photos of Ms. Jensen's injuries, taken by responding police officers the night of the incident. I'd also like to submit security footage showing Mr. Crawford and 4 other individuals breaking into the gallery, systematically destroying artwork, and Mr. Crawford striking Ms. Jensen when she attempted to intervene. He placed a tablet on the judge's bench. She watched the footage in silence, her jaw tightening as Dennis's hand connected with my face on screen. When she looked up again, her earlier neutrality had vanished. Mr. Crawford, this footage clearly shows you committing assault and battery. It shows deliberate, systematic destruction of property. Your attorney's characterization of this as a family misunderstanding is insulting to this court's intelligence. Dennis's attorney tried to recover. Your Honor, without context of their prior relationship, of Ms. Jensen's history of defying family guidance, of Mr. Crawford's genuine concern. Judge Herrera cut him off. I don't care if he's her stepfather, her biological father, or a complete stranger. He committed crimes. Multiple crimes. The restraining order is granted. Mr. Crawford is to have no contact with Ms. Jensen, direct or indirect. He is not to come within 500 feet of her residence, her place of business, or any location where he knows she'll be present. Violation will result in immediate arrest. She turned to me. Ms. Jensen, I'm also referring this case to the district attorney's office with a recommendation for prosecution. You should expect to be contacted about pressing formal charges. Dennis's face flushed red, but his attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm before he could speak. As we left the courtroom, I heard Tyler hissing something at his father, but I didn't look back. Marcus guided me through the courthouse corridors and out into morning air that felt impossibly fresh after the recycled atmosphere inside. That went better than expected, he said once we were in his car. Herrera's known for taking domestic violence seriously. The fact that she's referring to the DA means she thinks there's a strong case. What happens next? The DA will review everything. Given the video evidence and the value of destroyed property, they'll likely file charges within a week. Assault, criminal mischief, breaking and entering at minimum. Could also pursue conspiracy charges given Tyler's involvement in the document theft attempt. My phone had been buzzing throughout the hearing. I checked it to find dozens of messages. 3 from reporters who'd somehow learned about the case. 5 from artists expressing support. 1 from a number I didn't recognize that simply said, "You'll regret this." I showed Marcus the threatening text. He photographed it immediately. "Forward that to me and report it to the police. Any contact violates the restraining order, even through intermediaries. If Dennis is stupid enough to threaten you now, it only strengthens our case." The gallery felt different when I returned, no longer violated but fortified. Anna from the security company was there installing the final camera, and 2 of my artists, James and Simone, were carefully cataloging damaged pieces for insurance purposes. They both looked up when I entered, and Simone crossed the space to embrace me. "How did it go?" "Restraining order granted. Case referred to the DA for criminal prosecution." James smiled grimly. "Good. What he did to Yuki's piece alone deserves jail time. I've been documenting everything for the insurance claim. The total's going to be higher than you estimated. Some pieces I thought might be salvageable are too damaged." We spent the afternoon in careful assessment. 15 pieces completely destroyed. 8 more damaged but potentially restorable. The Tanaka installation was beyond recovery, each shard of glass photographed and inventoried as evidence. By the time we finished, the sun was setting, and my initial estimate of $200,000 in damages had climbed to nearly $300,000. Marcus called at 6 with news. "The DA wants to meet with you tomorrow. They're moving fast on this, which means they see it as winnable. Also, I've been getting calls from other attorneys. Apparently Dennis has a reputation in legal circles. 3 people have reached out offering information about his past behavior." "What kind of information?" "One's a former business partner who claims Dennis used intimidation tactics to force him out of a profitable deal. Another's a contractor who says Dennis threatened his family when he complained about code violations on a project. The third is interesting, a woman who worked in city planning who claims Dennis used his commission position to punish anyone who opposed his development projects. They're willing to testify. They're willing to talk. Whether it becomes testimony depends on how the criminal case develops. But it paints a pattern, Maya. This wasn't an isolated incident. This is how Dennis operates when people don't do what he wants." That evening, I did something I hadn't done since opening the gallery. I called my father's sister, Aunt Rachel, who'd stayed in touch despite the family complications. She was the one who'd encouraged my art interests as a child, who'd taken me to museums when Mom was too busy managing Dennis's moods. We'd drifted apart over the years, my fault more than hers, buried under work and distance. "Maya," she said when she answered, warmth in her voice. "I was hoping you'd call. Your mother told me what happened, though I suspect her version differs from reality." I told her everything. The destruction, the assault, the court hearing, the emerging pattern of Dennis's violence. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Your father would be proud of you," she finally said. "He always worried about leaving you with Patricia, knowing she'd probably remarry and you'd be vulnerable to whoever she chose. But he'd be proud that you built something meaningful and that you're fighting to protect it." The words hit harder than expected, bringing tears I'd been suppressing since the gallery floor. I didn't know I needed to hear that. "Listen to me carefully. Dennis Crawford is a bully who's never faced real consequences. Your mother enables him because facing reality would mean admitting she chose wrong, and she's been running from that truth for 15 years. You don't owe either of them protection from their own choices. You protect yourself, your work, your future. Let them face what they've created." We talked for another hour about family obligations versus self-preservation, about the guilt that came with enforcing boundaries, about how strength sometimes looked like refusal rather than accommodation. When we finally hung up, I felt steadier, more certain that the path I'd chosen wasn't vindictive but necessary. The DA meeting the next morning was in a cramped office that smelled of coffee and old files. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Park was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with tired eyes that suggested too many cases and not enough resources. She reviewed my documentation with the focused attention of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. "This is solid," she said after 30 minutes. Video evidence, medical documentation, witness statements, clear monetary damages. Mr. Crawford's attorney is already trying to negotiate, which tells me he knows his client is in trouble. What kind of negotiation? Probation, restitution, no jail time. Standard first offer for someone with no criminal record and community standing. I'm recommending we decline. This wasn't a momentary loss of control. This was planned, executed with help, and involved significant property damage plus assault. I want to pursue felony charges. She leaned back in her chair, studying me. I need you to understand what you're signing up for. This will be public. His attorneys will try to make you look unstable, vengeful, difficult. They'll dig into your personal life, your business dealings, anything they can use to create reasonable doubt. Your family will be questioned. Your mother will likely be called to testify, probably on his behalf. I've thought about all of that. I'm ready. There's also the question of Tyler Crawford's involvement. He attempted to steal business documents. He was present during the destruction and did nothing to stop the assault. We could charge him as an accomplice. I hesitated. Tyler was weak more than evil, a perpetual failure enabled by his father's money and authority. But he'd made choices too. He'd brought those contractors. He'd tried to take my files. He'd watched Dennis hit me and done nothing. What would those charges look like? Conspiracy to commit theft, potentially aiding and abetting the property destruction. Lesser charges than his father, but still serious. It would send a message that being present and complicit carries consequences. Charge him. He's an adult who made adult choices. He needs to understand that family doesn't exempt him from responsibility. Jennifer smiled slightly. I was hoping you'd say that. Victims who won't hold accomplices accountable make my job harder. I'll add him to the charges we file. Over the next week, everything accelerated. Criminal charges filed against Dennis for assault, breaking and entering, criminal mischief, and intimidation. Charges filed against Tyler for conspiracy and criminal trespass. Civil suit filed against both seeking damages for destroyed property, lost business income, and emotional distress. Liens placed on 3 of Dennis's properties to prevent asset hiding. The media picked up the story quickly. Local news first, then regional coverage, finally a feature in the arts section of a national publication about violence against women in creative industries. I gave selective interviews, always focusing on the facts rather than emotions, always emphasizing the destroyed art rather than family drama. The art community response was overwhelming. A prominent Seattle gallery offered to host a benefit exhibition, with proceeds going to help me rebuild. 5 artists I didn't know donated work to auction for the same purpose. A collectors group put together a fund specifically for galleries targeted by violence. Within 2 weeks, over $70,000 had been raised to help offset losses. But it was the call from Yuki that shifted everything from personal battle to something larger. Maya, I've been thinking about what happened to migration. About what it represented and what destroying it meant. I want to recreate it for a new exhibition, not just the piece but the story of its destruction and recreation. I want to make what happened to you part of the work itself. We talked for hours about turning trauma into art, about refusing to let violence erase creative expression, about building something even more meaningful from destruction. By the time we finished, we had a vision for an exhibition that would open in 6 months, not just showcasing Yuki's work but exploring themes of violence against women's creative spaces, resilience through art, and community response to intimidation. Dennis's preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. His attorney continued negotiating, offering higher restitution amounts, community service, anger management classes, anything to avoid jail time. Jennifer Park rejected every offer. She'd found 2 more victims willing to testify about Dennis's pattern of intimidation, and she intended to use them to establish this wasn't an isolated incident but a lifestyle. Tyler, meanwhile, crumbled quickly. Faced with serious charges and his father's attorney refusing to represent both of them due to conflict of interest, he hired a public defender who immediately began negotiating for a deal. He'd testify against Dennis about the planning, about his father's intention to force me out so Tyler could acquire the gallery space, about the calculated nature of the attack. In exchange, he'd plead to lesser charges with probation instead of jail time. I agreed to the deal not out of mercy but strategy. Tyler's testimony would seal Dennis's fate more effectively than anything else. His own son describing the planning, the intent, the deliberate timing around the exhibition opening would destroy any remaining defense about family concern or misunderstanding. Mom called once during this period, her voice hollow and defeated. "You're really going through with this? Sending him to prison. He assaulted me and destroyed my business. What did you think would happen? I thought you'd be reasonable. That we could work something out as a family. We stopped being family the moment he hit me and you chose to defend him instead of believing me." She started to cry, but I didn't soften. I'd cried too, alone in my gallery surrounded by destroyed work, and no one had comforted me. She'd made her choice. Now she'd live with it. The trial lasted 4 days. Dennis's attorney attempted every strategy in the playbook. He portrayed me as a difficult stepdaughter who'd always resented his client's authority. He suggested the gallery was failing financially and I'd staged the destruction for insurance fraud. He claimed Dennis had simply been trying to protect me from public embarrassment when the exhibition failed. None of it worked. Tyler testified on day 2, his voice shaking as he described his father's planning. How Dennis had identified the exhibition opening as the perfect opportunity because maximum damage to my reputation would occur when critics and collectors arrived to find chaos. How Tyler had been promised the gallery space once I was forced to sell. How the 3 contractors were hired specifically for their willingness to work without asking questions. His testimony was devastating, made more so because it came from Dennis's own son. Yuki testified about the value of destroyed work, both monetary and cultural. She brought photos of her grandmother in an internment camp, explained how migration represented inherited trauma and displacement, described the 4 months of painstaking work destroyed in minutes. Several jurors were visibly moved. Dennis's attorney tried to paint it as just property, replaceable with insurance money. Yuki's response was perfect. Art isn't just property. It's expression, history, identity. Destroying it is destroying voice. That's what he took from me and from every artist whose work he damaged. You can't replace that with money. The video footage was played multiple times. Each viewing showed the same deliberate destruction, the same calculated violence. Dennis hitting me was replayed in slow motion, the impact of his hand against my face impossible to dismiss as anything but assault. His attorney argued heat of the moment, family frustration boiling over. The jury didn't buy it. On day 3, the former assistant testified about Dennis's pattern of intimidation. The business partner described threats when he wouldn't sign away his share of a profitable deal. The city planning employee explained how Dennis had used his commission position to punish anyone who opposed his projects. A pattern emerged of a man who'd spent decades using power, money, and violence to get what he wanted, always escaping consequences because victims were too afraid or too resource-poor to fight back. I testified last, walking the jury through everything. Building the gallery from nothing. The 7 years of work to establish credibility. The significance of the Tanaka exhibition. Coming home to find destruction in progress. Dennis's words about teaching me reality. The assault. My decision to pursue charges rather than accept it as family business. Dennis's attorney tried to rattle me during cross-examination, suggesting I was motivated by greed, by vindictiveness, by anything except genuine harm. I stayed calm, answered directly, never took the bait. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty of assault in the 2nd degree. Guilty of criminal mischief in the 1st degree. Guilty of burglary. Guilty of intimidation. Dennis's face remained impassive, but I saw his hands clench white-knuckled on the defense table. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Jennifer Park argued for maximum penalties, citing the pattern of behavior, the calculated nature of the crimes, the complete lack of remorse. Dennis's attorney pleaded for leniency, emphasizing his client's age, his community ties, his previously clean record. Judge Herrera listened to both sides, then delivered her decision. Mr. Crawford, you used your position, your resources, and your physical power to destroy something your stepdaughter built through years of effort. You did this not in a moment of passion but through calculated planning. You involved others in your crimes. You showed no remorse, only anger at being held accountable. This court sentences you to 4 years in state prison for assault, to run consecutively with 3 years for the property crimes. You'll also pay full restitution for all damages, totaling $378,000. Dennis's composure finally cracked. He started to stand, to protest, but the bailiffs moved quickly. As they led him away, he looked at me one last time, and I saw not anger but disbelief. He genuinely thought he'd escape consequences. That his connections, his money, his status would protect him. He'd been wrong. Tyler received probation and community service, his testimony having earned him leniency. He left Portland shortly after, moving somewhere in the Midwest to start over away from his father's shadow. I heard through family channels that he was working construction, actually learning the trade rather than just managing failed businesses. Maybe consequences would teach him what enablement never could. The civil suit settled 3 months later. Dennis's insurance covered most of the damages, and liens on his property secured the rest. The total recovery was enough to fully restore the gallery, upgrade security further, and establish a fund for future exhibitions. His real estate development business collapsed without him, properties sold off to cover legal fees and restitution. Everything he'd built evaporated while he sat in prison. Mom filed for divorce 6 months into his sentence. She moved to Arizona to live near her sister, and we spoke occasionally, carefully, about neutral topics like weather and gardening. The deeper wounds would take years to address, if they ever fully healed. She'd made choices that prioritized her comfort over my safety, and forgiveness wasn't something I could force. Maybe someday. Maybe never. Either was acceptable. The gallery reopened 8 months after the attack with an exhibition called Resilience Through Destruction. Yuki had recreated migration, but this time she incorporated photos of the original's destruction into the piece itself. Shattered glass suspended in resin, images of the attack layered into the installation, a narrative of violence transformed into something even more powerful. 15 other artists contributed work exploring themes of survival, reconstruction, and refusal to be silenced. The opening drew national attention. Critics who'd planned to attend the original show came to this one instead, writing pieces not just about the art but about the story behind it. Collectors flew in from both coasts. The event raised over $200,000 in sales, with portions donated to a legal fund I'd established for artists facing similar situations. Standing in my restored gallery that night, surrounded by people celebrating creativity's victory over violence, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The destruction. The fear. The decision to fight rather than accept. The long process of legal battles and public exposure. All of it had been necessary. All of it had led here. Aunt Rachel found me near the end of the evening, embracing me tightly. Your father would be so proud. Not just of the gallery, but of your refusal to be diminished. That's the real art, Maya. Building something beautiful and then defending it with everything you have. Dennis was denied parole at his first hearing. The board cited his continued lack of remorse and the severity of his crimes. He'd serve at least 3 more years, likely more. I didn't attend the hearing, didn't need that closure. My closure came from walking into my gallery each morning, seeing art on the walls where destruction had tried to leave emptiness, knowing I'd transformed attempted silencing into amplified voice. The foundation I established, the Artists' Protection Fund, grew beyond expectations. We provided legal resources for creative professionals facing intimidation, violence, or exploitation. We funded security for galleries in vulnerable neighborhoods. We created educational programs teaching artists about contracts, boundaries, and legal rights. What began as my personal battle became a movement protecting others from similar violence. 5 years later, I stood in that same gallery preparing for another major exhibition. The space had evolved, grown more sophisticated, but the core remained unchanged. A place where voices that challenged and questioned found platform. Where artists who'd faced their own destructions could rebuild. Where beauty and resistance intertwined. My phone buzzed with a message from Yuki. She was in Japan working on a new series but wanted to confirm she'd be back for the opening. Other messages followed from artists, collectors, fellow gallery owners, all part of a community that had formed around shared values of protecting creative expression against those who'd silence it. I thought about Dennis occasionally, wondered if prison had taught him anything or if he remained convinced he'd been wronged. It didn't matter anymore. His chapter had closed. Mine continued, richer and more purposeful for having survived his attempt to destroy it. They'd tried to break me and created something stronger instead. That was the real story. Not the violence, but everything built afterward. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.